employer can have a policy. The employer can have a policy that during work hours, again, a little bit different than in the workplace, during work hours, employees cannot be intoxicated and cannot use cannabis. That's the positive side. What's prohibited is an employer cannot test for cannabis unless two conditions are satisfied. One is it has to be a scientifically acceptable method of testing. Most employers, particularly those in federally regulated sectors, are accustomed to testing employees' urine. Hair and saliva are now generally accepted, and we can talk about that more during this morning. So it has to be a scientifically accepted mode of testing, and it has to be conditioned on an assessment of whether or not the employee is impaired. For employers in New Jersey, good luck. Because it is quite clear, and the science has shown, and the federal agencies have published reports on, there is no scientifically proven method for detecting impairment of cannabis. Cannabis is highly idiosyncratic as compared to alcohol, its impact on the body. Alcohol, it's just math. What do you weigh? What was the percentage of alcohol? How much alcohol did you have? It's math. Cannabis is not that simple, far from it. So detecting impairment is the real bugaboo in this law.
So Jay, let's get into that part in a little bit more detail. And by the way, anyone could jump in at any point. So what does cannabis testing, what type of tests are there? What does it show? What does it not show? And is it bringing up other things that you did not know were there, other chemicals?
Well,
you start and then Bo just jump in.
With respect to testing, there are a number of illegal drugs that can be tested for using someone's hair, urine, or saliva. We're focused on cannabis, but let's not lose sight of that there are other drugs out there. There are other drugs that cause impairment. There are other drugs that make for a dangerous operator of equipment and or a less efficient employee. So testing can be a broad panel of drugs. With respect to cannabis, testing of hair or saliva or blood or urine does not mean the person's impaired. But 30 years ago, the US Supreme Court, in upholding cannabis testing of safety sensitive employees, said even though the test doesn't measure impairment, it's reasonable to have in place because it deters use. It's reasonable to have in place. It's reasonable for the federal government to require it to have in place because it deters use. Other panelists, Ray?
Well, go ahead.
I think it's really important to also just say, why do you care? And as employers, you care about their safety. You care about not getting sued. You care about protecting your business. And you care about having a workforce, particularly at a time when it's really, really difficult to attract employees. So where everything's at right now is really an interesting moment in time, just generally, because here we're talking about drug testing. And what a drug test doesn't look at is, again, it's not impairment. It's looking for cannabis metabolites. It's looking for, or the metabolites of the drug, how your body processed that substance. And think of a metabolite more or less as fallout in your system. It's not exactly specific of exactly this drug. So when you talk about, a drug test for marijuana, it could possibly be tripped up by hemp, which has been being sold here for a while in New Jersey. You have all sorts of fun hemp-derived products. So despite legal sales have just started right now, this has been a problem for quite a while already. And this is, one of those odd situations where you look at it and you're saying to yourself, what options are really available? And when it comes to the evaluation of an employee in the workplace too. The legislature did not leave you guys completely defenseless. The administration did not leave you guys completely defenseless as to how you can insulate your businesses a little bit. Aside from the drug and alcohol work-free policy that you're still allowed to have, aside from the prohibitions on safety-sensitive positions, it was really an important thing that they did in the regulations to say, hey, until such time down the line when the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, in conjunction with the Police Training Commission, develops rules for workplace impairment recognition experts, that there shall be no physical evaluation of an employee. That's a really big thing, because right up and then there, you don't have to have, when you are able to actually administer a drug test, you don't have to have that second component just yet. In time you will, but it's really important to recognize what that is.
Bo, can I jump in on that point?
Sure.
So now we're going to drag you through the legal weeds of what Bo just said. And I'll leave you with this. I'll start with the lead. If you're testing today and you're relying on what the New Jersey Cannabis Commission did last August in their regulations saying, oh, don't mind what the statute says. We said you don't have to test. I'm going to suggest you talk to your attorney about that, because it's an issue of administrative law of whether the commission could override what the statute says. So if you're testing today and on reliance on what the Cannabis Commission promulgated last summer, do so with your eyes wide open, because there are some very strong arguments that the commission doesn't have the authority to have held off on that. I think I've successfully added to your confusion as employers in the state of New Jersey. I'm just the messenger.
No, and we made that point to the commission, in a recent correspondence. Bo, did you want to jump in on that part?
It's, again, a really much a big picture moment as to where we are at right now. Going back to what I said as to why do you care? What are you trying to do as far as protecting yourselves as a business? There are components of this. If you do it the wrong way, you could be subject to a fine from the Department of Labor. That's a little scary as a business. You could possibly get sued by an employee or a prospective employee if you go about doing this the wrong way. But anyone have an unemployment claim in the last year? Here, there was a lot of them. The DOL their bandwidth is really stretched thin. There's a bit of a practical consideration here. How strictly will this be enforced? What are the timing components of all of this as to when it could possibly change? Who's actually going to bring this type of action? You have situations where, what's the big fear, I think, with a lot of this, and I don't mean to bust on our profession too much, but you go on TV late night and you might ever see a commercial that says, hey, have you been a victim of X, Y, or Z? Call so-and-so. You get 10 attorneys in the room from the same practice field. Half will be plaintiff's attorneys, half will be the defendant's attorneys. We're the type of people that be saying to your business, we want to keep you safe. There's other attorneys out there that are going to try and solicit business in this space saying, how do we go after you? And that's what kind of gets us really kind of freaked out here, because this isn't a moment of odd communication, because again, you're not completely defenseless. There's a lot of small upfront things you can do to protect yourselves and understand before this becomes a problem.
And just on that point, there's another provision that any employer, any New Jersey employer who is testing today has to be mindful of. The law says thou shalt not discriminate against someone because of a positive test result, or solely because of a positive test result. So if you're a New Jersey employer today and you're not doing any type of assessment prior to administering a test, you're potentially running afoul of that provision if you take a disciplinary action against the person for the positive test result.
So you guys have jumped right into the weeds. If the audience is slightly confused, because I think the state of the law is slightly confusing. So let me bring everyone back up for a second, get the base level of understanding, and then we'll dive back into how everyone protects themselves. So when we were advocating, when the law was being passed, and also now with the Regulatory Commission, we were trying to take the position, because testing is so uncertain as to what it's showing, that we should err on the side of safety, especially in safety-sensitive positions, and we should still allow employers to require or allow them to use a positive test result as the basis for taking employment action. The legislature rejected that, and they created a different system. As you mentioned, Jay, before, it needs to be a physical examination, what they call workplace impairment recognition experts. So I'll turn it over. We'll start with you, Jay. What is a wire, and what is their role, and are there any problems related to using wires? And by the way, just say as well, you had mentioned that when the commission adopted the regulations, they said you don't need a physical examination, which means you don't need a wire, because there are no regulations on certifying wires. So where are we right now with our wires? Where are we with the use of wires or not?
I keep on thinking wires, that show on HBO that everyone loves, but Ray is talking about the to be developed certification for New Jersey employers. Someone or some vendor who has expertise in the area. We are in uncertain territory about whether there can be a scientific development of an impairment assessment based upon cannabis use. The issue or related issue is actually before our highest court now, and has been for about 2 years, about whether a police officer who uses a technique called a drug expert recognition technique, it's a technique developed by Los Angeles County a number of years ago. It's a technique in common use throughout this country. The issue before our New Jersey Supreme Court is whether information, observations, opinions from police officers who use that technique is admissible in a criminal matter. And the underlying issue is there a scientifically demonstrated nexus between that technique and the opinion of whether the person was impaired? It's unlike the test for alcohol when you're driving. Go out, walk 10 steps, touch your nose. It's unlike that. It's a different type of assessment. And courts around the country have been split about whether the DER technique is scientifically sound. Massachusetts highest court a number of years ago said the technique does not mean the person is impaired, but observations of police officers can be admissible based upon relevancy. So, Ray, to get back to your question, to help out employers right there is not a scientifically demonstrated system for recognizing impairment. Having said that, there are vendors out there who are selling their services. I think if I was a New Jersey employer, I would look into that. I would look into training for supervisors. I wouldn't do nothing. I would look, if you're a New Jersey employer, I would look into instituting or underpinning an accident review system. There is going to be a point in time where New Jersey employers have to have an impairment assessment system in place. So why not start now?
Haven't said anything yet, so I'll jump in. I agree with you completely. I think employers need to do something now, but I wanted to just take it back a step, because we talked about the drug recognition expert. That issue is before the Supreme Court right now. Why do you as employers care about that unless you're employing police officers? Care about that because the standard that they're using for the drug recognition experts for police officers likely is going to be applied to the workplace impairment recognition experts, the wires, that you're looking potentially in the future to employ or to hire through a vendor relationship. And until we get some definitive guidance from the Supreme Court on this case that's before them, Olenowski right now, we're not going to get the regulations that we need for the wires. You're not going to be able to get the certifications. So that's why you care about this process that's going on with the police departments if you're a private entity, because we're really just waiting to see what the Supreme Court says about that scientifically based ability to determine impairment. But in the meantime, you absolutely should be looking to train your supervisors and your managers on generally spotting individuals who might be impaired. You're not looking to train them on what someone looks like if they are impaired by cannabis, but you should be providing that training to your managers on looking for the signs and symptoms of things that are just off from a safety perspective. Because as Jay mentioned a few minutes ago, cannabis is a relatively new thing that we're dealing with from the perspective of it being legal. But there are a number of other drugs that we've been dealing with as employers for decades, and it's been getting worse. So all of those signs and symptoms are things that you should be training your managers. They should have some ability to be able to determine if someone appears to be not operating in the way that they typically are operating when they come to work.
I think it might be a little useful too to kind of say how we got here. We finally got Jay Koenig's law, the medical marijuana expansion law, over the finish line in July of 2019. I remember being in the back of Tommy's Tavern and Tap when the bill was getting signed, and great day, wonderful for patients. And I'm sitting there talking to a few of my colleagues, and it's Olenowski. Everybody knows it's coming. It's something that we'd heard about being filed at the time. This is a big deal. And we were hoping in the summer of 2019 that this might be done in 6 months, 8 months, maybe a year tops. World changed pretty quickly after that. And I think that's always kind of lost on everybody as to how much that's impacted the shape of the rollout of cannabis here in New Jersey. By March of next year, the world had changed very, very much. The world had gotten much more slow just because of the public health emergency. Now, when Jay Koenig's law was going through, at the time, that bill was tie-barred with the adult use legislation. My old boss, my old job, we were very much involved in that piece of legislation. And there was always a general understanding with the legislature that we need to address, because good organizations such as this brought it up. How are we actually going to deal with impairment on the job? There's safety aspects of this. And, some people with law enforcement backgrounds who are very wise said, hey, there's this thing called a drug recognition expert. They're the ones that would be the starting point of this. They would be the seminal evaluator for who could actually come into any situation and say, that person's definitely should not be operating the forklift today or operating a vehicle, because they've been doing this for a while now. As time went on, though, we began to realize, that's like a bit like using an axe at times when you might need a scalpel, and there's not enough of them. These are DREs, are law enforcement officers. These guys are very highly trained for a whole spectrum beyond just cannabis and alcohol. And the legislature began to realize, maybe there's a bit of a lesser certification we can do. And the analogy I usually use for this is, well, if in your workplace, you might have an HR manager trained by like an off-duty paramedic or EMT as to how to use an AED to shock someone back to life in that really unique cardiac event. Well, here, a officer in time or some type of training program in time, someone that with that high degree of certification could train your HR manager as to how to deal with this unique event. And the way to think about what a DRE is versus a workplace impairment recognition expert, all bishops are priests, but not all priests are bishops. That old, if anyone's been to Catholic school and tortured by that a few times, that's a great little logical syllogism. Well, all DREs have the qualifications and time that could become a workplace impairment recognition expert, assuming their certifications will be kept up to date for what they'll be as a DRE. But not all workplace impairment recognition experts will be of the caliber of what a DRE is. So that's kind of how we got here. And now as things have moved on with Olenowski really, really being slowed down by the pandemic, by this very, very complex issue, and it's still just coming to an end, it really begs the question of what happens next and when. And as attorneys, I think we'd all agree that we should always plan for the worst case scenario here. And we're not entirely there yet, but it's still not the best scenario. And that's what I think is so important to really talk about. Again, how can you protect yourselves now? And also recognize, though, that some of this may not be as big of a deal depending on what happens next. It's still a problem now, though.
And before we get into how to protect yourselves, and at the risk of going down a legal rabbit hole, to just keep it simple, if the Supreme Court finds that the DREs are not scientifically valid and throws out that methodology, again, for criminal cases, we still have a law that requires physical examinations based on the same methodologies of the DREs, the wires. But in a civil context, not a criminal context, is the law valid, or if Olszewski throws out the DRE methodology, is it throwing out the cannabis physical testing as well? Without going too far down into the legal rabbit hole.
Right. Here's what I would say. I would say that the issue that would arise would not be a legal issue, but a legislative issue. The statute says what the statute says. Says the commission has to come up with regulations about wires. But if the Supreme Court says there's no scientifically acceptable method, I think that's a lobbying opening. I think that's a legislative opening, less than a legal litigation opening.
There's a lot of different things that could happen. That is an option that's on the table because, hey, I would personally argue that it's improbable that we completely nuke the concept of what a DRE is. There's a possibility that we touch on as to what should or should not be considered a scientifically reliable method as far as what one of these experts brings to the courtroom. But there was also this big question as to the order of operations here. So let's say the legislature doesn't decide to do police reform anytime in the near future, which would really complicate things too. Let's assume that they virtually don't touch DREs at all and things stay as is. Well, in theory, we could promulgate rules and regulations pretty quickly with the Police Training Commission, probably 6 months to a year. I should say quickly, but this is government. We don't exactly, we're not known for moving quickly. If things were to change pretty fast or change a little bit at all with DREs as to what is considered a scientifically reliable or a legitimate methodology, I should say, you'd have to then say, well, how would that impact workplace impairment recognition experts as far as to when they're developed in conjunction with the Police Training Commission? At the Cannabis Bar Symposium, I recently got to ask a phone question to the CRC directly. It's a great question as far as administrative law goes, but could, in theory, promulgate these rules simultaneously? CRC would really like to know the answer to that question too. They're monitoring it, but if not, that really adds on to the clock as to the order of operations if DREs has to have their rules squared away first, followed by then workplace impairment recognition experts. So there's several solutions on the table, legislative, administrative, but we are just kind of waiting to see what plays out in the courts.
So we've had a lot of conversation already about the need for employers to take best practices, that maybe use alternative methodologies of determining impairment. We have a business here with us, Tanner Hickman from Triple S Steel Holdings, who have been dealing with impairment issues for quite some time. Tanner could talk about it, but Triple S Steel has businesses in multiple states, including New Jersey. So if we can, technologically, we're going to have Tanner looking at pen right now. And Tanner, are you there? Can you hear us? Can we hear Tanner yet? Tanner, Tanner, can you unmute yourself?
At that point,
Host has him. He says Host has him.
I hope no one is suggesting that we administer an impairment test to Tanner at this point, okay?
also.
I've actually already taken mine for the day. I take it every day, 2 times a day.
Hold on 1 second, Tanner.
Can you hear me?
Hold on, Tanner.
With her phone on.
Yes, I got him. I'm on mute.
Okay. Tanner, can you say something?
Yes, this is Tanner.
I'm not going through her. Why is it not? Yeah, I'll try again.
Okay, Tanner.
Hello, this is Tanner.
So they got it. Yes.
Pleasure.
Try again.
Tanner,
Hello, this is Tanner.
no. Tanner, hold on. We're gonna come back to it in a minute.
I'm trying to work it out. So, let me talk about from a legal perspective. How would you do a time to review, the attorney, say, how do we discuss
What are our liabilities? What happens when you have adverse activists an employee and they say, you can't do that? What do you do?
So there's a lot that you should be doing right now. First of all, as employment attorneys, I think one of the things we'd like to say the most is look at your policies, right? We as employers should live and die by our policies. It's very important. They're not just pieces of paper that you want to put on a shelf and never look at. You need to make sure that you have good policies and good practices, protocols, procedures. So the first things you're going to want to look at are your drug policies, right? Your drug testing policies, if that's what you do, which you still are permitted, as we talked about, to have a drug-free workplace. You want to look at your hiring practices as well. Take a look right now at your employment offers. A lot of employers use the standard language in your employment offers that says this is subject to the completion of a background check and drug testing. So you want to look at that. If you're going to be doing that moving forward, you need to understand that there are some exceptions. There are some protocols that you're going to need to put in place. You're going to need to also want to train your hiring staff. So if you have it centralized in HR, that's great. You've got fewer people to look at. But if you have an organization that's a little bit more spread out and you have more individuals who are in charge of the hiring, interviewing, you're going to want to make sure that all of those frontline staff who are involved in the hiring process understand some of these changes. One of the things that you're going to want to really focus on right now, I think, is what happens after you get the test results back. So you are allowed to still test for a variety of drugs, including cannabis. But what you do when you get that back now needs to change. And this started even with the medical marijuana, that you need to make sure that you provide your prospective employees with an opportunity to explain the positive test before you just simply take action. So there are certain things you're going to want to put in place, and that specifically looking at what happens when that test comes back. So whether it's a positive test for a new employee, in which case you have to provide them an opportunity to explain the positive test, or an existing employee after an accident. So you're going to want to look at your practices and your protocols related to accident testing, your drug-free workplace. You're also, as I said a few minutes ago, you're going to want to start to look at training. Now, it's not going to be, you're not going to have wires because we don't have, we've talked a lot about that. We don't have those yet, but certainly giving some guidance to your frontline managers and supervisors is an appropriate first step.
I want to come back for a moment and underscore what we just heard about the hiring process and how important that is, and how important it is to combine the legal requirements with the practical. According to recent federal survey data, in New Jersey, about 1 out of every 7 adults age 18 or older has used cannabis in the last month.
What was that number? One in,
According to SAMHSA data, federal data, it was a survey done at the beginning, I think, of 2020, not even 21. About 1 in 7 adults over the age of 18 has used cannabis in the last month. So if your hiring manager is looking to make life even more difficult, then you can test for cannabis and take out about 15% of your applicants right off the bat.
Companies started self-insuring, not testing. It's safety sensitive because they could not hire workers. And the insurance issue comes in that safety sensitive for insurance policy, you have to test as a part of employment on exception, and then certain for safety sensitive you're allowed to have regular testing. We as companies in New Jersey are now self-insuring and hire because 1 in 7 test positive. And we need to hire workers. So I'm bringing the practicality up on that. Comment on what you're seeing in that space and then the role of insurance coverage and what about roles.
So there's a few things with insurance coverage. It's a critical component of having a master plan here to tackle where we are in New Jersey. And a few things. One, work with the carriers and your consultants and brokers while you're shopping around for insurance. The carriers, the data is publicly available that I just shared with you. You're now aware of it, and so are the carriers. And how they underwrite it now, and how you want to be proactive about it. So let's combine what we already heard this morning. If you're a New Jersey employer and you're already out there doing something about detecting impairment, I don't mean cannabis impairment wire. I mean about someone who's not fit for duty. Pitch that to your insurance company. Make something of it. Ask for credit. Ask for underwriting credit because you as a New Jersey employer are in front of the issue. So I think during the underwriting process, it's important to put your best foot forward. So now we're talking about synergy between different things that we've talked about this morning of what to do now. Second area, dealing with your insurance carrier. A decade ago, following an accident, your auto carrier or your general liability carrier would quickly settle a case if the person who caused the accident, your employee, tested positive for marijuana. Positive test, let's settle. Now the world has changed because there's a greater social acceptance of cannabis and an acknowledgement that a positive test doesn't mean impairment. So talk to your carrier about how cases are going to be settled or not settled. Don't settle cases right away. And the third type of insurance that you have to be mindful of, that you should be mindful of, is your employment practices liability insurance. And you want to make sure that it covers infractions of New Jersey's law. New Jersey's CREMA, what we've been talking about this morning. CREMA is the legal acronym, but the adult use legalization law, you want to make sure your policy, your EPLI policy, covers claims under that.
I think we've resolved our technical issues, but Bo, you wanted to make a comment first?
Going back to, why do you care? A lot of your businesses and your employees, they're already consuming cannabis off duty. They're off the job. So it's a problem. It's always been around. And there's never been more ways to get impaired from some type of either hemp-derived or cannabis-derived product. Right now, hemp's a totally gray area as far as the feds are concerned. States really haven't addressed this, but there's psychoactive properties in Delta-8 products, Delta-10 products. You can buy that at your gas station. That will trip a drug test. That's been going on in New Jersey since 2019. So just because adult use sales just recently started doesn't necessarily mean that there's a small amount of product out there on the streets. There's always been the black market. There's always been this weird new federal legal loophole with hemp-derived products. And now you have good old fashioned adult use marijuana plus medical marijuana. And, you know, as we look at it, it's one of those situations of if somebody's been impaired, if someone's impaired on the job and you want to question them, there's a good chance that depending on the nature of the job you have, or excuse me, the company you have, if you're a construction company, if you're a doctor's office, if you're transporting kids, if you're dealing with explosive material, whatever it may be, you're in a safety sensitive position. You've usually thought this through. It's time to go back and review that policy, but also too, I can't stress enough, there's a bit of a new dance that comes into play with your HR managers as to how to engage that employee from the time it's a prospective employee to the time an incident may have happened. Even bringing up cannabis when the incident happens has ramifications if done in the wrong way. You're allowed to ask, are you a medical marijuana patient? Or provide documentation that triggers certain response times. Your drug and alcohol policy may have had just because someone had a positive drug test doesn't necessarily mean you have to fire them or that you can't hire them unless you're in that, you know, safety sensitive position or there's federal contract involved that you wouldn't want to do that on. But it's really about protecting the employees, their safety, and protecting your business as far as liability from the state, liability for being sued by the employee.
So I think we're okay for Tanner now. So Tanner, 1 second. Are we ready? Go ahead, Tanner.
Hello, this is Tanner. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Tanner Hickman. I am my current role with Triple S Steel Supplies. I'm the Vice President of Safety, amongst some other things. But I've been a safety professional for about 25 years now. And it's really interesting listening to your discussion because our company has been having this discussion since about 2008. And so I'll just give you a quick version of how we're dealing with this. And as a matter of fact, we do have a facility there in New Jersey, and we do use this tool there in Jersey. And it sounds like from what I'm hearing, we're almost in compliance except for this wire thing, but we have our own wires in house already. So may not need to reinvent the wheel yet. So let me just kind of tell you guys how our story started. So 2007, our company acquired a place up in Denver, Colorado. And in 2008, we realized that there was medical marijuana was on the forefront out there. And we started noticing that we had applicants that were not able to pass the drug test because of cannabis. And, you know, we kind of looked at that and said, okay, things are changing, the world's moving on, what have you. Well, fast forward, about 2014-ish or so, it was very difficult to find applicants that could pass the test with the cannabis part. My boss, who owns our company, and I started having a discussion about how we were going to deal with it. And he's a pretty liberal guy. He basically told me to figure out how to hire potheads. Well, being from South Texas, which, by the way, I'm in Houston today. That's where I'm from. And being a safety professional, you're against the grain of everything I've ever known, everything I've ever, been involved with in my entire career. So it was difficult for me to do that. Well, by 2017, we basically couldn't find anyone to pass the drug test. And at the time, there was a study in Colorado by the University of Colorado that said that 3 out of 5 males between the ages of 18 and 30 ingested marijuana on a regular basis. Well, you can imagine the demographic in our steel yard of the labor force was males between the ages of 18 and 30. So that told me that 3 out of 5 of our guys were out there using marijuana, the ones that did get through the pre-employment testing. So I started looking for a solution, and all the things that you guys have been talking about the law enforcement style of detecting impairment is all good, but it's very subjective. And when you're a human being, I don't care how well you're trained or how neutral or objective you think you're being, there are things, in my belief, that humans can be very subjective on. And one of those is impairment. So as you all know, there is no universally accepted scientific way to detect someone being high on cannabis in the moment. That's a no-brainer. So my mission was very difficult. It took me about a year to come across this outfit that's actually based in Colorado. The name of the company is called Predictive Safety, and they have a product called Alert Meter. And what Alert Meter is it's a cognitive impairment test, basically. It's like a little video game. It uses shape recognition amongst a whole lot of other things. It's a very sophisticated tool. It's an app basically, but it's got a lot of science behind it. And what happens is this thing not only detects drug and alcohol impairment. I like to call it the impairment pie, cognitive impairment pie. There's a lot of things that will cause cognitive impairment. Drugs and alcohol is one. Another one would be fatigue, emotional stress, like a significant person to you has passed away, or you're having a fight with your spouse, something like that. Illness could cause cognitive impairment. Someone had mentioned earlier about prescription drugs. Sometimes doctors will give us a cocktail of prescription drugs that they don't realize is going to affect us and making us cognitively impaired. As a matter of fact, most of the time when that happens, the person who's impaired doesn't even realize they're impaired, but everybody else can see it. So this game is very interesting. So it takes about 60 to 90 seconds to play it. You can play it on any device, a desktop, iPad, mobile phone, etc. You can play it anywhere that you've got an internet service. It takes about 60 to 90 seconds to play it. And what it does is it scores you on yourself. It creates a baseline. So after about 10 times of playing this game, it creates a baseline on you. And as you move forward playing it, it is constantly evolving with you up to the past 25 times that you've played it. And at any moment in time, if you play the game and you're not behaving like you normally do, it sends a message to your supervisor or the designated person. Maybe it's a wire up in New Jersey. And it basically says, hey, something's going on with this guy. There's something, they're not able to focus. They may be, outside of their normal range, etc. And what that does is that triggers, in our organization now, that triggers a conversation, and the employee understands that they are not allowed to go to their safety sensitive job until they have talked with the designated person. And in the beginning, we really thought this was more of a drug and alcohol impairment test, but it has really evolved into something a whole lot different. And I sincerely believe that this company has knocked it out of the park with this tool, because if you think about it from a safety perspective, it doesn't matter what the impairment is. I can tell you, I've been divorced twice, and both of those divorces were really nasty. And I can guarantee you there were times where I was more impaired than I had drank a 6-pack of beer. And hopefully you guys can appreciate that a guy who's in our business, he's operating a 50-ton crane, if he's on his way to work this morning and his spouse says, you know what, when you get home this evening, all your stuff's going to be in the driveway and you can find somewhere else to live. Then he pulls into a parking spot at Triple S. He's going to go operate our 50-ton crane. Is he on drugs or alcohol? No, he's not. And we'd already been training our leadership and supervisors on reasonable suspicion and trying to, recognize behavior that wasn't normal. Again, very subjective way of recognizing that. So what this tool does is it raises that flag from a totally objective perspective, and it gets a conversation going. It doesn't tell you what the impairment is. You do have to sit down with the individual and go through, some certain steps. And what we did is we molded that conversation around the DOT reasonable suspicion training, which we'd already been doing with our truck drivers. And we learned that when we walk into these conversations, we don't walk in there with guns blazing. Somebody mentioned an axe versus a scalpel. We definitely use a scalpel in these conversations. We don't go in there with our guns blazing, saying, what have you been smoking or what have you been drinking? We understand now that some of these folks are going through some really hard times. So at the end of the day, we don't use this thing as a punitive tool unless there is reasonable suspicion of drugs or alcohol involved. Every other instance, we work with the employee, and if they've got something going on in their personal life they need to go take care of. And by the way, we don't force anyone to tell us what's going on. We just have a conversation, and we will not allow them to go to their safety sensitive job until they can play the game and get through it okay. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll give the employee some light duty to do, and let them come back after an hour or two and try to play the game again. And if they can get through the game, then we'll let them go back to their safety sensitive job, because we know now that it is a sound and safe practice. When you play this game and you've got a good baseline, it'll let us know if you're impaired or if you can at least get focused enough to do your job. So what we do is when our employees come in the morning, they clock in, they go play this game. It takes about 60 to 90 seconds. The more you play it, the closer to 60 seconds it gets. So it's very practical. And then when they clock out for lunch and they come back from lunch, we have them play it again. We've also started using it for other safety sensitive items that are jobs that we don't normally do. For example, if we've got a hot work project going on, everyone who's involved in it will have to play the game before we let them get involved in that project, so that we can make darn sure that everybody's focused, because they don't do that kind of thing every day most of the time. So at the end of the day, I really believe this is the wave of the future. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I don't think that we need cops in the workplace or anything like that. I think that this needs to be one of those deals where people are going to have to understand that the green wave is coming, and it's obviously already in New Jersey. And there is a way to get through this. And then obviously this allows, and this is kind of an unspoken thing, this allows cannabis users to use cannabis, just not at work. And we have, if we have a conversation and we believe that there's drugs or alcohol, we will take them down to the clinic and have them tested. And if they do test positive, then we go down that road. However, in every other instance, we try to make sure that we take care of the employee. If they need some help, in their personal life, what have you, we will do whatever. I'm going to give you one example of a story that made me truly believe in this product. And it actually happened in one of our facilities here in Houston. We had an employee come in on a Monday morning, couldn't get through the game. He went and talked to the designated person, and the designated person figured out real quick that the guy was very emotional. And the story was that his 15-year-old son had been put in the hospital over the weekend with an illness, and that he was basically on his deathbed. The kid was getting ready to die. So his supervisor, obviously was like, well, what are you doing here? You need to be at the hospital with your family. And his response was very admirable. And, he's the breadwinner, and he needed to come to work so that he could make the money and pay the bills, et cetera. Well, obviously, we are not going to let him go operate that 50-ton crane in that state. So we took him to the hospital, and that evening, his son passed away. Okay. Now that day, did we prevent an accident? I can't tell you for a fact that we did, but I can tell you before we were using this product, we would have never known that fellow was having issues, because a lot of these blue collar guys, especially, they come on and put their game face on, and you'll never know what's going on in their personal life or what have you. So again, this is an objective way to raise the cognitive impairment flag. And remember, this cannabis thing, in Colorado, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Colorado, but you go into a dispensary up there, you can ingest marijuana, you can lick it, you can drink it, you can suck it, you can smoke it, you can eat it. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that they do it up there. So it's easy to hide, right? And if you're just depending on humans to go around and determine if someone is impaired in the moment, it's not going to be a good thing. And the other part that I like about this is it's not as invasive as random drug testing. So, it's the employees in our organization love it. We started using it in 2018. We now have it distributed at over 40 locations across America. We use it everywhere, even in states where marijuana is not legal, okay? Because we now know that it's not just a drug and alcohol impairment tool. So anyway, that's really all I've got. I'm welcome to I'll answer any questions you guys have, and hopefully my information will get pushed out there. I'm not selling this product, but I'm a big believer in it. I've got about 1,200 people that are using this every day, including myself. And we know it works. Our accidents rate in 2018, the OSHA recordable case rate was hovering around a 4.8. We stay under 1 now. And it's not all just alert meter. There's other things in our safety program that help with that, but alert meter definitely help kick the can, so to speak. Someone just typed, what was the name of the app? It's called, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Grace. I can't hear anyone. I'm not sure if someone's talking or not. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Feedback though.
I can hear now.
Oh, no, we can't do that.
And we'll
Yeah,
put
so
up a
the app
whiteboard.
doesn't depend on any kind of language. It's an interesting question I just saw pop up. We have special needs people who use this game because it
Tanner?
scores
Tanner?
you against you. Yes.
Again,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. So just generally, there's a lot of different products that are out on the market, like what you described. And it sounds like you guys have some objective data in-house. How does the regulator in your state deal with saying that this is a scientifically reliable product? Anything that's like this is always going to be scrutinized to the scientific method. It's going to be scrutinized by organizations like the AMA. It's going to be scrutinized by OSHA. It's what makes this a good product. And where's that data stored? Who's evaluating it? These are all questions that a regulator will want to eventually know and also beat up potentially in the courts. That's what we're doing right now with DREs.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's the same with DREs. This takes part of the human element out of it, though. It is a totally objective way, and it's actually the own person, the person themselves is the one who's testing themselves, right? So it's not a person that's saying, "Hey, there's something wrong with that guy." This tool does work, and there is a lot of scientific data. I don't work for predictive safety. That would be questions for those guys. They are some really smart people. And I can tell you the product over time, since we've been using it since 18, has improved tremendously. There's been lots of add-ons and different things added to the algorithm that makes it even more accurate, in my opinion. But those scientific regulator type questions, I'm not that smart. I know it works, and from a practical standpoint, it's relatively inexpensive. It's very affordable. It's kind of like back when GPS first came about. It was kind of expensive, so no one used it. And eventually it got so cheap that the court started saying, well, that's gross negligence if you don't have GPS in your big truck, right? Well, I believe that this tool is going to be one of those things in the future, too. I think that it's going to be found to be scientifically accurate.
Topics I want to cover. So, Tanner, if you could just hang on, we'll see if we get time for more questions. But I want to turn to the panel for a second. Can everyone still hear me online? We're good? Okay. So we've been through a lot, but the law also provides that if you have a federal contract and the federal contract requires that a person, your employee, test 0 on a test, that's perfectly acceptable, and you could require that of your employees under the federal contracts. However, there's a lot of other federal laws out there, either dealing with CDLs, or commercial driver's licenses, or people working on railroads, or a number of other professions which are federally regulated that also have zero tolerance provisions, but yet the New Jersey law does not have zero tolerance provisions. How does an employer deal with the conflict now between what federal law is requiring and what New Jersey law does not allow you to do?
Well, there's 3 buckets of, let's call them exceptions to the adult use legalization law. One is if the federal regulators say you have to test, then you have to test. Most common example, in our society are commercial motor vehicle drivers. So there you have to test. Second, you may be party to a contract with a federal entity. You may be a federal contractor. You have to read your contract. The contract might say that you have to test. That's less likely. More likely, it says you have to comply with the drug-free workplace law of 1988. That law does not require testing. Similarly, you may receive federal monies through a federal grant. You have to read the terms of your grant. The grant might require you to test. Unlikely. More likely, it says you have to comply with the 1988 federal drug-free workplace law. And then there's a fourth category of employer, an employer that's regulated by the New Jersey state government, and the regulation includes a requirement that you have to test your workforce. And my best advice to you under those circumstances is talk to your regulator, because that regulation probably is no longer in force and effect. But you have to have an open dialogue with your regulator about that.
Well, you wanted to jump in?
I was just going to say, like, NJ Transit Engineers is a perfect example of that. And this is going to be something that we'll be dealing with for quite a while. And of course, there's got to be a very clear line of communication with the different regulators in the state, with the CRC, having these open discussions. And, I think we're just at this weird juncture again, where education is so important. It's good that you guys are here paying attention, that NJBI is doing this. But even on the state's part, if I were the EDA, if I were the Business Action Center, I'd be putting things out there saying, here's what the law is. This is what the status of it is. This is what you are allowed to do. This is what you are not allowed to do. Just generally. Not give it as hard legal advice, but this is the current state of play. Have people understand, and small businesses understand why things currently are what they are and what they will potentially be. It'll make a lot of nervous people less nervous and take a little bit of the panic out of the room. But in the meantime, here we are just having these types of discussions.
Well, I think one thing is obvious is that we could spend the entire day, on these topics, but I think we've only begun to scratch the surface. I think that type of guidance is excellent. Talking to your attorneys, I'm sure you will all agree, it is excellent, or your HR department. I did promise to call on Dave Knowlton for the first question. So can the audience hear him if he speaks? So Dave, you had a question. Okay, so I will repeat your question. Don't make it too complicated.
He's straight up. My view is that what happened drugs that it's not this problem spend more on so clients have my and I also agree that that approach is comprehensive. We need to explore because there are most that benefits. So my point is advocacy. It's more than out of the out of now, very set up.
He's in Texas. He almost flew in for this, but
With a very right. I like and about half of were fine. They were in, but they were, and so you have to balance and stuff. They don't. Maybe. Right.
so Dave, thank you for that. I will take the compliment.
Rach,
Oh.
so for those online, actually this does approach this practically. And
Hey, I would like to thank you, Dave, for the comments and build off what you said. We already have folks, as you alluded to, utilizing, whether it be prescription drugs, cannabis, currently. But the law in New Jersey says something very different from what we have for years. So I would love for you to just once again explain to our businesses that we are going to have to require that extra step, where currently that is not necessarily with getting required and drug recognition experts implemented. So we already have a lot of folks using things in the workplace, but cannabis is
Yeah, and let's start work. And these can be our final remarks as well. To answer that. So, Kerry, let's start with you and work our way down this way.
Sure. So I think the question generally was an overview of now there's this extra step. You're absolutely right. There is this extra step. Cannabis needs to be treated somewhat differently than all of the other previously exclusively controlled dangerous substances that we were able to test for. So as far as an overview, I'll give the quick. You are still permitted to ensure the safety of your staff, your customers, the greater population out there. You just are not permitted to discriminate against individuals solely because they use cannabis. You are permitted, though, in your workplace, as Jay mentioned, you listed, you are permitted to prohibit your employees from bringing it onto your property, from using it, ingesting it, licking it, smoking it, doing whatever, the whole list of things. Or you are not required to allow them to basically use it while they are at work. You just really can't discriminate against them for using it on the weekend. And because we don't have scientifically proven tests to show whether I just went outside and used it or whether I did so 2 days ago, that's really where we are right now. We're in sort of this limbo area. We don't have great testing to be able to determine that the way we can with alcohol and other drugs. So there is that separate step.
I keep saying it, but there's never been more ways to fail a drug test than right now. Now you have the black market, adult use sales, medical marijuana sales, hemp-derived products, CBD products, whatever it may be, products in other states that are legal. You don't know where your employee consumes, so they can't always assume that what they did was potentially illegal up until a certain point. So what I would just really emphasize is going back to solely for marijuana. If you don't have a drug and alcohol policy, get one. If you have one, update it. If you have one, make sure you know when to give it to a prospective employee. It should probably be the first document they see anymore. Hi, hello. This gives you a whole lot more protection as a business going forward. And again, understand that, hey, a lot of people out there are already using this already. If a person were to fail that drug test, doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to hire them depending on the nature of the job. Obviously, safety sensitive positions, federal contracting, these things come into play. Caminos' law, which is something that the Department of Human Services is working through right now as far as regulations for direct support professionals goes. Here they're getting close. Came out the last NJBIA panel, which was good work. Speaking of areas that have tight workforce issues. So yeah, it's a new dance. It's good to have a discussion with an attorney about it, but you guys are not left defenseless by any means.
Okay. I think we learned or were reminded of two things this morning. One, a lot of people use cannabis. Two, testing for cannabis in New Jersey is really complicated. So against that backdrop, here are some recommendations. Consider keeping a testing policy in place as a deterrent. How you use it, you'll have to be more careful how you implement it. You may take cannabis off the panel of drugs, but having still the prospect of being tested for drugs, you should still consider having that in place as a deterrent. Two, develop further your in-house fit for duty assessment, whether you call that impairment or not impairment. Whatever capabilities that you have more of them. You haven't developed anything yet, shop the marketplace, get smart about it. You're going to have it at some point if you want to test for cannabis. So develop your fit for duty muscles as employers. Three, Michelle raised an excellent point. Work with your insurance carriers, whether that's comp or general liability or EPLI. You are cognizant, they are cognizant of the two things we learned this morning, that a lot of people use cannabis and it's really tricky to test in New Jersey. So work with your carriers. And fourth, come up with protocols or consider protocols of what to do after an accident. It is common, for example, with motor carriers to review each accident to determine whether there's fault or not fault, in terms of what the consequences are for when someone an employee engages in an accident that's fault. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank, all our speakers today. I think this was excellent information. It's obviously that the employer community has a lot more educating to do, so we understand how best to protect ourselves. It's obvious we need to continue working with the legislature, working with the regulatory commission to come up with practical ways of resolving these issues. Again, I just want to do one last thank you, and we are going to take a 10-minute break and come back at a quarter after.
Yes, I do. I just also want to thank the panel and thank Ray for all the information. I think it's also just important to note that please use the NJBIA as a resource in this area, as well as we can answer any questions you have. And as our panel did allude to, we have been asking the legislature and specifically the CRC to get more clarity and to post those FAQs so that we do have some guidelines to work within. And so I just want our business community to be aware of the work that we're still trying to get to that clarity as we move forward and understand some of the nuances that our esteemed panel was able to share with us today. And so we'll take a 10-minute break and come back and talk about workforce. So, okay.
Good job. Thank you.
Outstanding.
Bo?
That's right.
Thank you. Once we get a technical issue, I hate technical issues.
Great job, really. It was it is a complex issue, and I do love the idea of that more comprehensive look at all the things that affect. We keep saying as a business community we have to lean into changes and not, the sky's not going to fall tomorrow. What do we do in response? So doesn't stop our advocacy for asking for more predictability.
I'm from Massachusetts.
You can lobby, you can ask for change.
Just having this
You
panel
can
is hard.
crawl into your desk and suck your
Other
thumb, or you can do
states.
something about it.
Exactly. And that's what I said. I can't tell you how many companies I talked to over the last year who said, I'm done with this. I can't do I'm self-insured. Getting elderly.
We went into other aspects. Now we only concentrate on impairment and marijuana.
Okay.
I'm curious Right here.
So I'm with you. No, I'm with you. Yeah. It's great time. Yeah. Look at that.
So we're testing our. Better. Check with everyone when I was done. So we can get logo. This is what I guess the real test will come when it's time to go. We should just be, everything works. Okay, we're unmuted. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, all right, so we're talking from here, so can they hear us out, Joy?
I am yes.
Okay, great. And you're on video.
No.
All right. Thank you. We had 2 weeks before they got everything rolling, so that was pretty good. I see folks making their way back in. So welcome back, and I just have to say I really love that first panel. It's really stimulating and really gives a lot to think about. And that whole concept really of thinking in that higher realm space and society was really fun to me. And I think there's reasonableness to a lot of this. And one other thing that just resonates with me is, this is coming down the pike, and we always tend to say, now the sky is falling, which we don't have. Really,
Again?
the whole idea of our ability to lean in and be part of the solution in that more comprehensive way, I think, is significantly important. And I think step back and impact one step at a time, right? All these are all and have to do this morning. We go back and we look at that problem that's the future. I think it comes to a place that we can wait for the next round of guys to come along and continue to step into the I want to introduce an introduction and this I gave you already a nice shout out earlier on Zoom Canvas. I have to people, extraordinary shout out for leading our incredible GA team who is everywhere, every day, on every issue. I mean, when you say you got the best and most talented, I have no reason to not be able to say that 100 times. And so, Christy, the CIA, the business community, to see on our behalf every day.
No, thank you, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be here representing the business community on such a critical business issue that we just talked about. And again, thank you to our sponsors, NJM and Rowan University, for sponsoring this very, very informative discussion today. So we're going to transition just a little bit. So we talked a lot about the legal implications and how our businesses can get ready for employees and themselves as employers. Now I want to talk about an issue that is very, very important to the state of New Jersey, something that my team spends an awful lot of time discussing across all sectors of the economy, and that is our workforce. And NJBIA has leaned into ensuring that we have a highly skilled, adequate workforce to attract our employers. Well, we are privileged here now to have a new industry coming, or is here, I should say, is here and is hiring, and also has some specific needs, as do our other employers. And so we want to get out on the forefront of this, especially in light of the fact that we all know that we're having such a hiring crisis right now. I'm sure it's probably going to be impacting your industry as well. And so I am joined by a terrific group of panelists who will talk us through what the workforce development needs are for the new industry that's here in the state. And so I want to introduce our panelist, Aubrey Flanagan, who's Manager of Professional and Corporate Development at Raritan Valley Community College Workforce Training Center. Thank you, Aubrey, for joining us. Kyle Hayes. Kyle is Head of Talent Acquisition for Curaleaf Holdings. Welcome, Kyle. Thanks for joining us. To Jennifer Madden, Assistant Dean and Director of Graduate Studies for the Rohr College of Business at Rowan University, our sponsor. Thanks for being here, my alma mater. Just had to plug that. Sorry about Scott Rutter, who's a partner at Vernon Trent Public Affairs and the founder and president of the New Jersey Cannabis Association. So, Scott, thanks so much. And thank you for the continued collaboration with NJBIA. I look forward to working with you on many fronts related to the cannabis industry. So, folks, we're here to talk about workforce. So we're starting from the ground up in New Jersey, although we do obviously have medicinal cannabis that has been in effect for some time. So new industries being created, some are going to maybe even be lost. What kind of jobs are we talking about being created over the next maybe 1 to 5 years? Anybody want to take Scott, go ahead.
Sure. So there's going to be all kinds of great jobs. I mean, there's going to be jobs that are plant touching jobs. They're going to be working for Curaleaf and cultivation. We're going to have HR professionals. We're going to have basically mechanical engineers working on equipment. You're going to have your store associates. There's a whole host of jobs just internally that you would have in any other company. So cannabis is a business, and just like any other business, it's a somewhat new product for people. So people are trying to wrap their heads around it. But at the end of the day, you're going to have attorneys and accountants and service professionals and customer outreach, and you're going to have marketing folks. And so any profession, whether it's the janitorial services all the way up to the CEO and everything on the ancillary market as well, it's the same thing. So whatever you're thinking about, in a traditional business, that's exactly what you're going to find in the cannabis business. But it has so many different facets. So the manufacturing, the cultivation, and so forth. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I'll just say at our dispensary settings in New Jersey, we've been adding obviously like more associates to help with all the increase in flow that we've seen there. We've also at Curaleaf tripled our cultivation capacity in the state. So, like with adding all of those people, we need, more HR, more IT, more finance, all those roles that you would think of in a typical business. We're, adding all of those as well.
Do you anticipate any industries starting up or being lost because of recreational?
Well, there's expansion. So like security, for example. So security is expanding. Every dispensary, every cultivation facility has a requirement for security that's attached to the state police, the cameras and everything else. So there's more and more security companies that are out there that are transitioning from maybe they were something we're protecting like an apartment complex or something like that. Now they're moving and expanding into the cultivation or in the cannabis space. Those things are expanding. The marketing opportunities, so we're going to have probably at the end of the day about 1,000 license holders in over the next few years. Every one of them is going to need a marketing team. Everybody's going to need that IT professionals to ensure that they're going to get their proper amount of market share. So it's going to be a heavy competitive environment, and that's where you're going to see a lot of these other professionals. How do I differentiate myself? And so you're going to see like expansion of marketing.
Yeah, something that we've heard over the last year or so is we've really been exploring what the cannabis industry needs in terms of coming from higher education. Is that it's pretty close to being its own economy. It needs everything, and they need transferable skills to come into that space. So to extend what Scott was saying, you can think about they need accountants, they need people in finance, they need people in supply chain, everything, any kind of job that exists somewhere, it's eventually going to be needed in cannabis.
Right. It's a business. At the end of the day, it's a business. And if you have talent that you've pre-existing talent and skills from your past jobs and you're looking to transfer those into the cannabis industry, there are training programs, small training programs that can give you that little bit of industry insight so you know how to position yourself and your skills for these new jobs in the cannabis industry. So that's my plug for my programs at Raritan Valley Community College.
It's true, though. I mean, all that transitional skill sets is going to be there. There are challenges with cannabis as an industry because it's still federally illegal. So banking's harder and different. How we deduct our traditional business taxes are different. So you not just want to get an accountant, you're going to need an accountant who's familiar with concepts like 280E, which is a subset of the tax code, things like that. Just going to be a different type of different type of accounting. And then on the marketing side, there's a lot of restrictions because of the nature of this industry. So having those professionals who can work through those nuances are going to be important. So getting job training at state colleges, community colleges is a very important part of the process.
Kyle, if you could elaborate a little bit further on this point, as somebody who is manufacturing and selling, people think of recreational cannabis and they may think of just growing a plant. clearly much more complicated than that. So we already talked about there's going to be a lot of the traditional types of jobs that other businesses utilize. But could you go into a little bit more depth on, do you need chemists, engineers, retail managers? Like, talk to us a little bit about what really is needed in terms of those specific jobs, boots on the ground.
Absolutely. So within our cultivation facilities, we have full labs. They do extraction there for like our cartridge products and things like that. So we use HPLC technicians, which are analytical chemists. We have, a bunch of people from botany backgrounds or people with horticulture backgrounds that work in these centers. And then within our retail facilities, we need retail managers, we need, inventory specialists that are, all of this product is tracked very specifically. So it needs, we need all these new people to help with the increase in all the product we're seeing with the, adult use. So we're adding, a bunch to our cultivation facilities with the scientists and, the people working with the plant, but then also to the retail just to keep up with the demand. So a lot of, logistics, inventory, and then, like you said, the scientists on the cultivation side.
And not to mention, I'm assuming, again, the accountants, the lawyers that are needed as well. So.
Well, and it is not just a plant, right? It is just a plant. Quite frankly, if you just want to grow a plant, which we're not allowed yet in New Jersey, but eventually we will for patients specifically, but it is just a simple thing. Once you industrialize it, that's a whole different animal, right? So having that consistency across the board every time. So every time you go and you go get a Sunkist beverage, it tastes the same. And 2 weeks later, it tastes the same. So you want to have that consistency. So it's incumbent upon the cultivators to have the technology there and have the experienced professionals there to ensure that it's a proper product and it doesn't have bacteria or mold. And that's where the advent of testing labs come from. So we don't test our tomatoes and our corn that we grow at the local farmers market, but we definitely need to for cannabis, because if you consume cannabis and it's got something in there, bacteria otherwise, it could be harmful from an ingestion perspective. So the testing labs, professionals at the cultivation facilities will help ensure that this is a very safe environment.
Yeah, we've also added like a bunch of quality roles as well, right. Just for the cultivation facilities to make sure, like Scott said, everything is standard and consistent when we're putting these products out.
So, Scott, you had mentioned that we have how many licenses?
Well, there's 12 active licenses, and each of them have different different dispensary. Some have 3, some have 2, some have 1. There are a bunch of approved ones coming out from the 2019 round. And then, of course, right now we're going through a process of issuing new licenses.
So you had mentioned potentially 1,000.
Right.
We're not even over 50 yet.
Correct. And I say eventually, right? So you look at what's a fully realized market look like? And I'm not certain it'll be 1,000, maybe 800, maybe 500, maybe 300.
A lot more than we have today.
Much more than we have today, which is going to be great for competition. It's going to be great for the consumer. Competition will help drive down costs. That's been a big concern, for a lot of patients. But now that we have patients, now we have adult consumers. Now we're going to have more licenses. Hopefully, that'll drive down the cost for your purchase. But yeah, no, it's.
So we have a workforce crisis.
Yeah.
Right. So where's your workforce coming from at this point in time then?
So Curaleaf actually does partnerships with a bunch of organizations. So within New Jersey, we partner with From the Block to the Boardroom, which is like a second chance hiring initiative. So we try to hire like 10% of our new hires from populations impacted by low-level cannabis-related offenses. So with those relationships, we hire, a lot of people that way. And then we've also been partnering with universities to get people that are in these cannabis programs that have just been, created to get these people with that experience on board at Curaleaf.
So I'm assuming you're going to need to have a supply chain ready to go with folks who are going to enter this facility. So I'd love to hear from our 2 education partners about what is your role in this? I heard about the partnerships, but how are you geared up to address this demand?
Want me to start? Okay, so a little over a year ago, Rowan University launched a Cannabis Institute that focuses on research, policy, and workforce development. But I'll focus more on the workforce development component, which is making sure that we are finding ways to build and offer curriculum that is going to meet industry demands. So right now, the content that we have, some of it is live, some of it is starting in the fall, falls into 3 basic categories of business, chemistry or biochemistry, and regulations. We have much of this content, all of the content is at the graduate level. Some of it is at the undergraduate level. Some more of it will be coming through the undergraduate level as well. And I can speak from the business side. We talked with a lot of people in industry at different levels, thinking about the MBA program, because that would be putting into the workforce more mid-level or senior level people into the industry. And we said, what are the pain points? What are the issues that you have? Because we know that they need all of the crossover talent. We knew that they needed people with all the functional skills, the accounting, the finance, the marketing, the supply chain. And the 2 points that industry continued to tell us were pain points is lack of familiarity with the evolution of the industry and where it is, cultural aspects, social aspects, things that if people aren't familiar with them, they're not meeting up with industry demands or consumer demands or interests. So we built some curriculum in that area and also focused on business model innovation. So some of the points that Scott touched on, the idea of what's the business now, what's it going to change over time, because it's changing so rapidly. So if you think about business model innovation, every industry, every company needs to continuously think about business model innovation. But when you're thinking about it in cannabis, there are all of these additional constraints and restrictions and challenges. So pairing that up together so that people coming out of our program are going to be able to handle all of that change and volatility and problem solving. And then we have cannabinoid chemistry. And we have biochemistry, and we have all of the different thinking about legislation. And I need my notes for this one a little bit. So thinking about creating and developing legislation, evaluating legislation, interpreting legislation. They're my rough notes on where it falls into those different areas. So this is our beginning. This is our starting point. And as the industry grows in New Jersey and beyond, we will continue to offer additional curriculum, partnering with industry, making sure that we keep the dialogue open so that as we're developing coursework and programs, that it's going to meet what the industry anticipates that it's going to need.
Right, exactly. And honestly, where can I sign up for that MBA program? Because it just sounds so incredible with the policy analysis and the business systems. So on the flip side, higher education has 2 different customers, right? They have the youth, and they also have pivoting professionals. They have training programs that can help individuals take the skills that they have and then position it for the industry. So you asked, where is the workforce coming from? I think it's coming from partnerships. It's coming from the partnerships that you described with other labor market intermediaries to help give back to those who have experienced all of these negative externalities of the illegality of cannabis. It's also coming from partnerships with education and industry, right? We're working with industry to develop programs so our graduates and our alumni and our participants can move right into the jobs. So just to piggyback off of one alumni success story at RV is we had the first training program. It's like 5 days, it's 15 hours, one Monday night, just for 3 hours. And it runs through the laws all the way to role playing. When you stand behind the counter, how do you act towards a patient? How do you act towards a consumer who wants to buy this product, right? That program became so because we had a dispensary applicant say, where can I hire people? And then RV said, well, we have some pipelines, but what if you created a training program to ensure that you had that qualified workforce ready when this came up? So they created this very short-term training program, and it really has grown and scaled. It's also offered at RCB, Rowan College of South Jersey. So it's really just taken off. And the individuals who take that program are pivoting professionals, are HR individuals looking to get to the industry. There are people on the MMP medical marijuana program. And like I said in the success story is there's some individual who took it and they just did packaging, advanced manufacturing, like on the floor. They took our class. We have like very short job fairs with the people who are hiring in our area. I should say that Raritan Valley covers 100 and Somerset counties, and there are some dispensaries and warehouses that will be there. So we had some job fairs. He got picked up by Verano, and he moved from advanced manufacturing, no industry experience, took the training class, and now is a production supervisor, a packaging supervisor, who helped usher in this adult use market. So they're very, very cool to see how someone takes their existing talent, takes a very short training program, and then flips it. But there are needs to very much so have that mid to senior level management, have that policy expertise to understand the strategic aspect of it. So that's where your workforce is coming from.
Thank you. I'm going to go a step further though. So when we're out talking about the workforce demands of the future across all industries, a lot of times our companies say, you know, the workforce isn't trained for the needs today. We need to get our students more intrigued about not only a 4-year degree, but also maybe a community college degree. And NJBIA is in a formal partnership with our community colleges to address some of that pipeline and that synergy as well between our 2 years, 4 years, VOTAC, K through 12. They also say, we got to start earlier, middle school, high school, educating. So my question to you is, has the industry started to approach our K through 12 education system to have a conversation about, I know everyone's like looking at me, but have we started the conversation about, you know, this is a viable career pathway. You could be a chemist, you can be an accountant, you can be an attorney focusing on legalized cannabis in New Jersey. And if not, how do you see that going forward?
I'll say that I've heard discussions about that within the cannabis industry. I've not yet heard those discussions on the K through 12 side happening, other than personal individual conversations of people who want it to happen, but not from a speaking for the school system official standpoint.
Right.
You know, so people who are friends, family, associates, who are teachers in administration. So I think that the awareness is there. I'm not sure how ready people are for that.
I think it's a readiness thing. So it's also, we're brand new. So we are brand new. I mean, there's only 12 operators in the state of New Jersey. And I mentioned there's going to be a lot more than that. But that conversation is actually happening at the K through 12, but they just don't mention cannabis. So it's a technology, skill set. It's all the skill sets we talked about earlier that you're going to need for the
STEAM
future.
And the STEM focus.
That's exactly right. So STEM and STEAM, that has been a big part of our overall dialogues. When we talk about cannabis legalization and making sure that it's a very inclusive industry, the STEM and STEAM really plays a big role in that. We're going to have 40 to 50,000 new jobs, right, created from this industry just here in New Jersey. And you talked earlier about like where are we going to pull these folks from? I will tell you, it's an exciting industry. It's brand new and it's super cool, right? So you just think about all those things. And so those younger professionals, like, I want to do this. I want to try this. I want to be in there. Those of us who are actually in here know it's a really tough job. It is a real job and it's a tough job, but it's a cool industry to be in. So I think we're going to have, it won't be easy to attract that, all these folks all at once, but it's going to be systematic. And I think we're going to get the right professionals there.
As I also mentioned a little bit about being, all inclusive and such. And I know that the legislation also sought to address some of the equity, challenges in the state and to address this issue by providing some jobs and opportunities to those in disadvantaged communities. Love to hear from the panel, what are some of the things being done? And I know, Kyle, you started mentioning some of them, but what do you envision are some of those collaborations moving forward to attract, a very broad workforce? And I can also say we also work a lot even with the disability community as well. So what do you moving forward?
So I had mentioned like the one organization that we partner with specifically in New Jersey, but we have, it's called our Rooted in Good initiative, where we partner with different suppliers or vendors for a more equitable, sustainable, and diverse cannabis industry. So the goal is for us to partner with 420 of these, partners by 2025. So right now we've already partnered with 100 after 1 year, and we have that 420 goal because we know that's a lucky number.
So during the years of campaigning for legalization, right? So try to get it through the legislative process first, and then When that was able to get done that way, we went through the ballot initiative and it passed. We didn't win this conversation, this debate, this campaign based on money and profit, right? We won this debate based on social justice and social equity. So when you look at the legislation and how it's crafted, it does do a lot of great benefits for communities that have been disadvantaged. So, whether you're a woman, a minority, a service disabled veteran, you have that conviction of cannabis, from way before. And I'll describe that if anybody's really interested in that, why that's really critical. But also, just making sure that this industry is inclusive, that we created these impact zones, that we're making sure we're going to the right communities. There's a lot of concern that, this is just going to be in the urban environment, not the suburban areas and all that stuff during the initial conversations. But quite frankly, when you look at this, there's a ton of activity going in. Everybody wants to be in Jersey City and Hoboken and Elizabeth and these other places, but the suburban market's going to be huge. The population is going to really dictate where these shops are going to open up. And like I said, we're going to have a lot of different opportunities and a lot of different things. But when you look at how they're going to prioritize the licensing process, it really does go back to social justice and social equity.
And I'm assuming our educational partners have as well.
Yeah. So I'll mention 2 points. So for the MBA program, generally, what we seek to draw into our MBA program and prepare are responsible leaders. So there are core required courses that everyone takes on responsible leadership and people, profit, planet, and things related to leadership with that focus of responsibility in leadership. When we think about the cannabis concentration or the elective classes in the MBA that relate to cannabis, there are the very specific plant related or cannabis industry related courses that students can take. But we've also chosen electives across the university. They're not specifically focused on cannabis, but they're graduate level courses from different places that students can take to tailor it for what they want to do in the industry. And that can focus, these classes can focus on things like diversity and inclusion. We have classes on sustainable development. We have classes on what it means for social movements and social changes and what happens when different regulations impact different types of populations. So that information can also be used, understood, adapted, brought into the cannabis industry. And we are in early stages of partnering with industry. Universities and colleges, we're really eager and we want to partner with the cannabis industry. We also, Aubrey and I have talked about this quite a bit. We also have certain limitations. We can have relationships with anyone and all different organizations. We're restricted in some of the formalities and some of those relationships. So what I would say is, please, if you're thinking about, if we're talking in any of our audience is actually in the cannabis industry or moving into the industry, please reach out. And that goes for social groups and organizations as well. Reach out to your university, your colleges, and see where they would like support and partnership, because we want to blend this in as we're training people. Not everything can always be done in a class, right? Sometimes it has to be done with activities and relationships and partnerships and things that are happening out of the class, especially when things are moving so quickly. Sometimes it's month to month, things are changing and we can't necessarily change the curriculum that fast, but by working with people in industry, we can make sure that we continue to expose our students to what's happening now.
That's the key. Is I went like this because please partner with us. I mean, we have vehicles for customized training. If you have a business and you want to move into the cannabis industry, we have a network of subject matter experts, faculty who can come into your business and train individuals on the certifications and the knowledge needed to take you to the next step. So we have the vehicles, we have funds available for training, right? So that's also really cool. A flip side to giving back to the community, just some another plug for our training program, NJ Canister, is that we have 5 veteran scholarships. So seats are limited because you want small class sizes to get good individualized attention and mentorship. But we do have 5 scholarships for veterans because our specific partner wanted to give back to the veteran community and offer this as a pathway into employment. So ensuring that there are those opportunities for people who have been disadvantaged in the past is really necessary to ensuring that inclusive cannabis industry.
Yeah, and I'll add one more point, Aubrey, since you reminded me on the scholarship side.
Yes.
We have a set of scholarships that are really made for change agents in any industry. They can be from any industry and going into any industry, but that includes cannabis. So that can also be, a lot of what I see in the cannabis industry. It's people coming from these different disadvantaged communities that are real change agents. I would love to see some of these people come into our MBA program and then have business as one more piece of their tool set for making positive changes. So we do have those scholarships that do exist that, again, they're broad. They're for the MBA. They're not targeted to necessarily cannabis, but they are for people who see themselves as change agents and want to go forward. But I would also say that if you are in the cannabis industry and you want to sponsor scholarships, whether it's Rowan or otherwise, I think that that's a great way to partner with a university or a college and find ways, how can we make everything more accessible for a broader variety of audiences?
We also talk a lot about value and experience learning. We talk about education as well and our education.
So I want to give a great example. Just had a conversation last week with a group that is focusing on veterans. It's that popped in my mind when you asked the question. So it was perfect. But there, so the person who's running this, I'll be somewhat vague because they're still developing things, but is a service disabled veteran, 100% disabled, PTSD. He's developing a program to help fellow veterans get into cultivation because it's therapeutic as well. So not everything needs to be the industrial size scope. Some of it can just be that micro license that's also available for people who want to grow cannabis and they want to develop a new skill set and they're working through their issues at the same time. So that's something that you start to see in this space. And I think you're going to see the same thing with occupational therapy as well. So I think it's going to find that an industry like this is going to be very inclusive from the type of workforce that we will develop, and also the people who are looking for, those rare opportunities where they can, again, develop a skill set, deal with an issue that they have, or maybe they have limited disabilities, and this is a great place for them to work as well. So you're going to see this come into a different spectrum soon as well.
What about from our education?
I know you have a fantastic experiential learning philosophy.
Yeah. So we have different classes, more so at the undergrad than the grad level, that are focused on experiential learning. And something that we're working on for the MBA program that already exists at the undergrad is that we can build in live problems that are happening in an industry into classes and have groups of students work on it and essentially work as consultants for that company, but they're also working as consultants under the direction of faculty. So there's a lot of learning involved on all sides for those. So that's another area where I would say contact your local university or college and find out if you're in the cannabis industry and you would like to have some of that type of partnership. That's also something that I think a lot of schools and universities would be open to.
That's critical.
I'll toss it back to, it's kind of that same idea that we were talking about in terms of the transferable skills and being able to do that crossover talent and adapt. Universities can do the same thing. The same model that you have for any other subject area, it can be shifted and done for cannabis as well. So we can take our existing problem-based learning type courses, and just by working with clients from industry, that's one way that can be brought into schools.
I mean, if you're going to break into this industry, what kind of training you need for that job, right? If you're looking for a specific job title, you need to look at the qualifications and then go forth into the training programs that are necessary, whether it be a degree, MBA, or just a small micro credential. So going on to the micro credential side, in terms of experiential learning, that really comes out in the facilitation of the course because it's put on by industry, right? I mean, these are specific examples that come from industry. And at the end of the program, on like day 5 of the training class, you do become a dispensary technician and you role play and pretend to administer certain strands to your patient. Now that it's adult use, that section has been a little truncated for the medical vibe. but and the medical section, I don't know why I said vibe, but the medical side. And then for the adult use side, it's changing. So it's definitely more of product marketing instead of a medical marketing. So that is going to expand and grow definitely.
And what's interesting though, even though we're transitioning or expanding rather from medical to adult use, it's the same plant. So a lot of people who will be buying it as an adult consumer versus a medical card holder, they're still going to go and look for that product and would like to engage in the conversation with the dispensary associate to say, hey, you know, I just have problem sleeping at night, or I got, you know, this issue with my restless leg syndrome or something like that. What do you recommend? And so that the person needs to be, you know, smart enough, trained up enough to be able to answer some of those questions without necessarily giving medical advice. But, you know, but it is the same plant. It's not like there's a medical plant and an adult use plant, same plant, different strains, but.
Right. From your perspective, since you're obviously hiring right now, are your education partners in your workforce, you know, trained to meet your needs? Where do you see the education opportunities growing, or where would you get crystal ball say, wow, I wish that, you know, this county college, this university would do X? What would it be?
Yeah, I would say with our staffing, like usually what's most difficult to fill is those roles that are plant touching, because it does require like that agriculture or horticulture background. And that's not the easiest to find. So like we do have training on site for people that come in that might not have like the direct plant touching experience, just to get them up to speed. So like that's really where we struggle the most, like those roles, you know, like the roles with the chemistry and the science, like people don't necessarily have that experience within the cannabis industry yet because it's so new. So we're taking people from other industries, and they can use those skills to like, you know, figure out what we need. But I think, you know, hopefully soon there'll be more, you know, more available that have the actual cannabis experience. But that's basically like the most, you know, difficult roles are the actual plant touching or, you know, touching the product with the science background, just because it's so new.
Yeah. So I'll add on to that just for clarity, and then Aubrey, you can chime in on it as well. So when we think about all of the plant touching aspects, which clearly having experience, especially hands-on experience, is so critical. One of the challenges for universities, colleges, because of the Schedule I status and the federal status, any institution that has federal funds as a component of how they exist is in danger of losing those funds if they cross certain boundaries. So we, and I'm talking for all of higher education right now, we have to be really careful when you're thinking about any kind of plant actual touching experience. For the most part, the answer is no, we can't do it. There's a couple of exceptions, but there's not that many, right? For the most part, universities and colleges are in a place where, for example, with our chemistry and biochemistry department, they've put together a good number of classes at both the grad and the undergrad, but they're studying it from a perspective. They're looking at research. They're understanding research methodology. They're understanding the chemistry of that plant. They're not actually able to touch that plant on campus and do direct research on campus. We're restricted from that. So it is a gap. Mm-hmm. And if things stay the way that they are right now in terms of Schedule I, it's going to continue to be a gap unless somehow there's another rule that comes out where universities are exempted.
No, spot on. I mean, that's the biggest challenge right now when we want to talk about clinical trials, all these wonderful things that we really want to do as an industry. A lot of the universities, a lot of the community colleges are restricted what they can do. I mean, some of them are trying to figure out how to, you know, have classes where you're growing hemp instead of cannabis, but then there's some concerns. What happens if the THC went above the proper amount for cannabis to qualify as hemp? So there's a lot of concern that these universities have, and it's real, and it's stunting the growth actually. So, I mean, there are enough folks out there that have some skill set and the training, like a company like Curaleaf has the capacity to have a larger training program versus a smaller guy who just has, you know, the micro license and they're trying to get caught up. There's a lot of folks that were in the legacy market, you know, call it the black market. We call it the legacy market. Better. And, but the legacy market folks, you know, they're very welcome into our industry now. right? They have a skill set. They were growing something in the basement or garage. They have the beginning parts of the skill set. And then you want to get into the larger scale things, and then they have to be trained up. But there are a lot of people out there that have those skills and that desire. But to go to your point, until there's federal legalization, probably the first step will be banking, and that'll happen probably after the midterms. But once that happens, you'll start to see the flow out of other restrictions being lifted.
Okay. Employee. So if an employee is or someone is interested in pursuing a career that you all referenced, what do you recommend? Like, where do you recommend they go? Where can they find information?
So for Curaleaf, if I could just say on our website, it's curaleaf.com/careers. We list all of our, open opportunities so that people can apply directly. And then they'd be vetted by the hiring teams. And then anytime we open a new store, which has been happening a lot recently, we'll do a big campaign for the new store opening. And then in terms of training, we bring that team on board. And then we have a training team in-house that goes and trains, the whole store for a week before it opens. We do have, a good process down for bringing people on board and getting them up to speed with something they've probably, never done before.
So switching to businesses just a bit, if somebody was interested in starting a business, is there any recommendations?
Yes, be very thoughtful about it, because here's what happens when people are trying to get together and they want to go after a license, they want to fulfill some dream. They put a team together, people that never worked together before. They're out there trying to raise some money. Make sure you understand who your team is. Make sure that that's a big thing. So when you're walking down your first week or two, everybody's excited. That would be, it's great. 2 months later, you're fighting about something. So it's really important that you understand your team for the long term, right? So that's a big issue that people have. Like, hey, you got marketing background. Hey, you got the skill set. Let's go in this together. And you find out you can't really work together. So that's a big part. The other part is funding. It is just like a lot of other businesses, but more expensive, right? So if I wanted to open up a liquor store, you could draw a comparison between a liquor store and a dispensary. It's not going to be cheap to open up a liquor store. It's going to cost you, depending on the town, $750,000 to buy the store, to get the liquor license, put product on the shelves, and so forth. The same thing is going to happen with cannabis, except every town, well, most towns, there's probably one or two still blue towns in New Jersey that don't allow alcohol sales, but for the most part, every town has a liquor store, right? In New Jersey, with towns being able to opt out and not have any cannabis businesses whatsoever, it makes the real estate value for cannabis businesses in the towns that have opted in much more expensive. So the supply and demand on real estate is actually, is becoming an issue too. So you have to go in there with just, your eyes wide open and making sure that you have the right team and that you have the financing behind you. Some banks are now offering loans. I'll give a plug to BCB Bank. So Bayonne Community Bank is now doing traditional business loans. That's rare. So most banks, if you went to TD Bank or Bank of America or whatever, you're gonna find that they're just gonna shut the door and you got to go and all that stuff. So it's a lot of it is friends and family fundraising or venture capitalists, people who are going to invest in this industry. For people who want to get property but they can't afford it, there are real estate investment trusts, REITs that are out there that fund cannabis businesses. So you're really getting your core together, putting the right team together, and know that you need to have the money to get through fruition. God forbid you spent $500,000 and stopped because you couldn't move forward, because you couldn't get the financing. So that's a big part of just getting your startup ready.
And I was just going to extend on 2 points that Scott had mentioned. So some of the advice that I give to students that ask about what should I be thinking about is, first of all, we say, yes, think about the business idea that you have, but don't limit yourself to plant touching. There are more jobs than just opening a dispensary or opening a grow facility. Again, all of those ancillary businesses that are necessary. We encourage our students to think about that. We encourage them to really think about the finances. Are they ready to do something where it could take them 1, 2, 3, 4 years before they actually start to see a real return on their investment? Because depending on what they're choosing, it's not necessarily, you could have the best concept, you could have the best team, you could do everything right. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to launch within 6 months or a year and a half, depending on what you're trying to do. And then I'll take it one step further for your thought about knowing your team and being prepared with your team. Because of the challenges right now with banking, there's a lot of challenges with financing, and you need to be really smart going into it and make sure that you don't get yourself into a situation where suddenly you're a victim of a predatory lender.
Oh, for sure.
So it's just go into it with your eyes open and know that it takes sometimes a little bit of additional research, investigation, checking people out, because everything isn't all set and structured and ready to go yet. It's still really, really early.
Great.
So BIA, largest business association in New Jersey, sole proprietors up to our largest corporations in the state. You had mentioned that there is a lot of opportunities. It's just not, in the dealing with the plants essentially. So for our businesses listening, our not-for-profits listening, our educational partners listening today, how can they get more incorporated into this business?
So one of the things I recommend people do, and I'll give my organization a plug, the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association is a trade group for the cannabis industry. We work with the NJBIA, we work with other groups, we work with higher education. For those folks who say, for example, you own a fleet of vans because you're subleased or subcontracting to Amazon, right? You buy more vans, and then all of a sudden you're now doing delivery services for the cannabis industry for dispensaries, or you're getting a distribution license or a warehouse license, or wholesale license rather, and you're moving product around the state. So there's simple things that someone says, oh, well, I got all these vans, I got these drivers, I got this business plan. All I need to do is apply for this distribution license, delivery license, or what have you. Those but how do I get in here is joining organizations, NJBIA, NJCBA, and getting engaged and doing the networking that we all do. That's how it's going to happen. You're not going to Google your solution. You're going to have to get out, find it, talk to people, and interact.
And I was just going to say right on. So on your website, do you have supply chain opportunities or vendor opportunities? Like, I said to you, I remember go check out Curaleaf's website and see here's how I, as a marketing firm or as a logistics firm, might be able to work.
Yeah, I believe there's definitely on our website, probably like an email address or someone to reach out to if you wanted to get in touch with us, because we love to partner with like our community and people in, local areas. So I would think that's definitely available there.
I would assume from a higher ed perspective too, partnering with marketing firms alluded to, notes, and trying to reach out to those businesses saying, hey, if you want to upskill your employees, if you're looking to go to a master's or receive a master's degree, come our way as well. We're open for business.
Absolutely. And I will reach out to universities as well. I want to get both of your guys' information. If I'm doing, a lot of recruitment in the area, and just ask, do you guys have a cannabis program at your school? Would you be willing to post our jobs at your, your career fair or whatever you have? I go to career fairs all the time just to have, if they will allow us. Some universities, they won't allow, Curaleaf to be there, but we want to be present and have everybody know that, we're looking. And we want these people that are in these, these programs at these universities, because again, not a lot of people have this hands-on experience. So to have that is so valuable.
So we talked a little bit about legislation on the federal level, and the clinical trial component is very real, right? With that experiential learning opportunity and the challenges it presents. What if you had to pick something? Is there anything that needs to be changed in the existing state law that would help to attract the workforce of the future?
It's hard to say because we're still not fully realized yet, right? So what holes are we missing? What hurdles do we put up that we don't realize are hurdles just yet? That's going to all sort of come to fruition over the next year. So all these applications. So they're in December 15th, they opened up for cultivation and manufacturing licenses. More than 100 have been approved already. We have another meeting later this month. We're going to hear about another dozen, 50, 60. So we're going to hear all these things. So attracting the workforce and what legislative changes we need. I have legislative ideas to change the structure on how we're doing licensing and stuff like that, that I think would make it a smoother process. But, when it comes to, the legislation that's required to attract employees to our workforce, I don't think that legislation is going to do that. I think it's the people on this panel, people out here, people over here, those are the folks that are going to really build up this whole entire workforce and create those workforce development programs to enable people to be successful.
And I'll just say on my end, it's difficult because, we're a global company, but nationally, each state has different regulations. And in Pennsylvania, somebody might be able you have to get badged to work at the cultivation center or the dispensary. You might be able to get badged in Pennsylvania, but you can't get badged in New Jersey because of something like maybe on your background check or something like that. So it really depends on the location and what the legislation is within that state. Yes.
We deal with that all the time across every industry.
Yeah.
So not new to us either. So before if anyone has any questions, I did want to ask, a final question really around, if you had to look into the crystal ball, what would be those workforce challenges, needs moving forward? What have we not shared with our participants here today?
I think we shared a lot. Honestly, I think it's the challenge we have right now is, like I said, it's so brand new. 12 license holders are going to turn into 212 license holders and so forth. And so I'm super pleased to see the higher education community really embrace this as an industry and getting out front on it. That part right there is part of the normalization of this as an industry. So while we're still dealing with federal issues, normalizing this and say, like, Johnny's got a job, working in the cannabis industry, and he got his degree from Rowan, and he's super excited about it. I mean, that's awesome. And that's really what's exciting about creating a brand new industry. But I think I think it's just us continuing to work together collectively, the license holders, higher education, organizations like ours, NJBIA, NJCBA, will really be part of it. But a lot of folks are out there, they're just, they're not paying attention to these things, and they are creating their own hurdles. So like I said, you can't Google your way to a successful license application. You need to be out there networking, and you really need to be engaged in the process.
Yeah, I think some barriers is really just the federal legalization issue. And if you all know, there's training grants available for pivoting professionals who are underemployed or unemployed to reskill for the industry administered through the Department of Labor. You can't really use those funds because it's Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds from the feds to get these training grants for cannabis training. So federal legalization really is the linchpin in ensuring an inclusive future for all.
I just answer the question. You repeat the questions. They were having problems earlier.
And I'll go back. Those five equipment plus them. $50,000. Talking about $1.3 billion. And yet this education for everyone. So when they mentioned some of the Budweiser, so when we move from school to that,
that's a fantastic question. And it is just once we get more dispensaries out there. So cultivation is usually like an industrial park or greenhouse on a farm. Same with manufacturing. So the community sees the dispensary. That's what they typically see. Once they see a dispensary and once they realize that it's just a storefront, it could look the same as a Hallmark store, an Apple store, or a liquor store. It doesn't matter. Once they start to see these things and all the awfulness that they may have, the preconceived notions, outdated stereotypes and stigmas, once they go like, oh, this isn't a big deal. Like right now, people are commenting because there's long lines at Curaleaf. Congratulations, by the way. They see these long lines because we just opened up. Those lines go away. It's a regular parking lot. It's just a regular it's consumer experience. And I think, sure, we all guess. I'm a little guilty of that as well. I got a 21-year-old, 18-year-old, 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old. both of whom just texted me while I'm talking to you guys. So, but I recognize that I've been very open with them, and it is not a big deal for them and also their friends. So they're in that group that we're all concerned about, but it's not a big deal to them. They're teaching medical marijuana and health classes in the K through 12 programs. So, it's not something that's unusual. It's something that they've been taught at health class from a medical perspective. Not every school is doing this, but a lot of schools are doing it now. Just getting that comfort level, driving by and see that the boogeyman wasn't there. There weren't people outside, smoking weed. They're going to see that it's just another normal business. So it depends on the town, which is interesting. I won't mention specific towns, but if you go to the Northwest, in a farming community in the Northwest of the state, they are shunning. They're coming up, they are literally coming up to township meetings with pitchforks that we can't have this in our community, but it's an agricultural community. Well, we can't have this type. And they make some outrageous statements. And then a lot of those township members of council, they don't move forward. You go to a different part of the state, another agricultural part of the state, and they're embracing. We're an agricultural, of course. I mean, I'm talking to Republican towns here and a Republican town there. So it's not just a Democrat town or anything. I'm saying the same type of community, but the attitude's a little bit different. So that's the hardest part in this integration is really going to come down to, again, once we see this as not the evil industry that some perceive, that it's a agricultural industry that actually solves a lot of societal challenges. People addicted to opioids, people addicted to alcohol. This is a different type of a plant that can solve some of your medical needs or some of your recreational needs without having the addiction or the overdoses that can occur. So once we see the integration of all this, it's going to happen. But it's just going to take a little while.
So I just want to leave, we only have a few minutes left anyway, some closing remarks, but, I just want to thank you because what I'm hearing here today by the breadth of this panel is, we have our higher education institutions that have put together programs and curricula to address the workforce, to educate our workforce, just like any other field, that these types of jobs literally range from the very scientific in terms of chemistry and other things to our legal, lawyers that are going to be needed, and down to our retail stores as well. And then I'm hearing from the industry, viable business sitting right here, and Scott and all his advocacy efforts, that this is a place where the workforce can look to get educated and to get a good paying job. And for our business partners to be able to engage both with our higher education institutions as well as our provider community. So thank you. Any final thoughts?
I think you covered it definitely in terms of higher ed.
Moderator, good job.
Yeah, no, seriously, partner with us. I mean, we're ready. We're viable partners. We have individuals who are ready to be at your business. So definitely partner.
Yeah, that's really it. That's partnership.
So I'd like to thank you all once again for spending the morning with us. Very informative conversation. I turn it back over to our president, Michelle.
Great, thank you. Two great panels, a lot of great information shared in two different realms, right? Building the industry on one side and having the pipeline of talent to be there to bring it to the responsible type of industry that we know we're going to become here in the state of New Jersey, to the challenges we faced on the other side. And I think, I would say for every challenge, there's an opportunity, and it's incumbent upon all of us to lean in to those challenges and create opportunities from them. And BIA is here to be a resource. And I would say this, from what you heard today, we didn't have a lot of time for a lot of questions this morning. If you have questions leaving here today, or you want to help us on what the FAQs need to be to help you to go back and deal with these issues in your workplace, or otherwise, please drop us some notes on that. Let us know. The dialogue doesn't end here. We just teed it up today. This has a long way to go. Okay, a long way to go, and we're going to be there riding the wave the the whole time. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our partners for today's program. Their names have been in front of you the whole time, but thank you to NJM Insurance Group and our event partner, Rowan University. It truly is about collaboration, and thank you all for your collaboration today. Everyone continue to be well, be safe. Again, use the resource, and thanks for being here today.